And it's like, if the opposite of love is fear, it's like, and God is love, like, it's like, well, what are we really teaching? How can we be teaching God if we're putting people in fear?
What up, fam? Welcome to another episode of Life Beyond the Game. Today's guest is Riley Cote. He's a former NHL player. He was a bruiser. These guys in the NHL that their whole role is to fight, and found it really fascinating. You know, the game within the game that hockey is. You know, I played in the NFL, so I'm not super familiar with the intricacies. And this brawler, this intense energy. I saw this video on his website, rileycote.com. There's a video of him just beating the shit out of people. And it's really fascinating because he goes from this really intense fighter in this really, really aggressive sport into becoming a yogi and really deeply connected to his spirituality and his purpose in life now, which is an advocate and a voice for sacred plant medicines. And he's doing a lot of really cool things in the space. And he's really passionate about supporting this great paradigm shift we're moving through. And we cover a lot of ground in this episode. We talk about, you know, his time fighting in the NHL, his dream of becoming an NHL star, into his transition and into his slow awakening into these deeper connections of self and to spirit, and the things that he's doing. We talk about the collective paradigm shift we're moving through, and we add a lot of valuable insights, tools, techniques to help support you on your journey. I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Riley Cote. Before we get started, I want to share with you something I am super excited about. It's something that it's been on my heart for a few years now. And I've been really passionate about building community ever since my time in the NFL. And one ways I'm doing this is through a new community. I'm actually relaunching the Heart Collective. The Heart Collective has been an incredible part of my life. It's taught me so much, and I've received a ton of clarity on bringing this vision to life in a really beautiful way. And one of those things is who I'm being called to serve and who I'm being called to create community for, and that's high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, and visionaries. So if you're someone who has a 7 to 8 figure business, you're a C-level exec at a well-established company or a fast-growing startup, or you're an influential visionary who is focused on having high impact in your industry, then this community is for you. What makes it really special is its size. It's an intimate group of 40 founding members that we're calling in 2023. And the very unique thing about this community is that in order to join, you have to participate and attend one of our initiation retreats, a rite of passage that we facilitate out on a river in Utah. It's a 4-day rafting expedition. There's 2 experiences. There'll be 20 spots each. And I've been doing this retreat the last couple of years out on the river. And out of all of the healing I've done, the journeys I've been on, the communities I've been a part of, there has been no more profound healing and experience of presence and ability to reconnect with nature, with myself, and with community than out on this river. And that's why I'm really, really excited about this offering and this community that we're building the foundation for in 2023, and will be something that continues to grow and expand in really beautiful ways in 2024 and beyond. A lot of really cool visions. If you feel called to apply or check it out or learn more, there's a link in the show notes. And yeah, check it out. I love y'all. Enjoy the episode. Riley, what's up, brother? How you doing?
Not too bad. How you making out?
I'm doing well, man. Really, really looking forward to our conversation today. Yeah, man. I mean, I was looking through your website last night, and there's a video on there that I think it's like a fan tribute video of you just knocking fools out on the ice, just like brawling. And I know there's a role. I played in the NFL, so you know it's a different sport, but there's a role in hockey that is like the brawler, the bruiser, someone that is their role is to like beat people up. Tell me more about this and what it was like to just access that primal energy. I mean, I could feel it watching this video. You just like crushing these guys' skulls in. And yeah, tell me what that was like, man, to have to go through that every day. Or is that something that you enjoyed?
Yeah, you know what? It's kind of a thing of the past. Tell you honest truth, they're really working their ass off to get fighting out of the game. There is still fighting in the game, but very very minimal amounts. Like the leader in the NHL now would probably have 7 to 10 fights, where back when I was playing it was 30 to 35 fights a year. But it was interesting role, interesting ride for sure. I mean, it wasn't something that I grew up wanting to be. Was a fighter. It was something that I decided to take on as a role to give myself an honest chance of ever playing, one game in the NHL. It was self-preservation, really, as rough and tough as it looks and as hardcore as it was. It was just one of those things, fighting out of fear, fighting out of fear of letting my family down, myself down, friends down. Because growing up in the middle of Canada, I was, a big fish in a small pond in my city. And, I was actually a hockey player. I wouldn't even consider myself a hockey player when I was playing pro. I was a hockey fighter that played a little hockey, and the psychology of it was interesting. It eventually took its toll, emotionally and spiritually draining. As you can imagine, jacking yourself up to fight every single game, and a lot of the times I didn't fight, so I was still in that in the middle of that fight or flight response and this chronic state of anxiety, and always looking over my shoulder. Even if I got in a fight, my first shift, my first period, I was already looking for the next one or expecting another one, and so. It was again emotionally draining. It led to a lot of issues down the road. When I first took on the role, it was something exciting for me. It was challenging, right? It was, a young guy, 20 years old, turning pro. Let's just fight our way up, and let's have some fun doing it. But as you can imagine, it just gets old. Fighting guys like your size on a daily basis, and revving yourself up to fight guys way out of your weight class. It just took its toll, honestly. So.
I mean, did you have to so this was something that was a role that, getting into the NHL, you were kind of labeled like this is the only way you're going to really make it is if you become this brawler and fight. Is that so? That's some mindset that you had. So every game you were going into, you had to like keep that at the forefront of your awareness of like this aggressive primal rage. Like I'm about to go like beat someone's ass. That's what I need to do. And that was your awareness every game, always.
Well, I wouldn't say always. When I turned pro and decided to take on the role, my 4 years of junior hockey, I moved away from home when I was 16, 16 to 19. I was kind of a little bit of a player. I was never drafted. My last 2 years, I put up decent numbers. In 4 years, I think I was in maybe 20 fights. But again, I was looking at the guys getting called up. It was guys with lots of goals and lots of penalty minutes. Back then, like as I mentioned earlier, there was actually still a distinguished role, for a guy like me to actually take on the role of the enforcer or the energy guy. So I made a decision turning pro. I could have went back to junior for one more year and been an overage 20-year-old and try to, be a player and get ice time and all that. But I was just looking around in my competitive nature. Like I mentioned, the 20 fights in juniors, I did pretty well in them. I was aggressive, like just my nature when I was playing the sport. I was always an aggressive guy. I did well in the fight. So I knew I could handle myself. But I, knew I was fighting guys that were legitimately training to be fighters and were already fighters. So I had to kind of really shift my mindset and saying like, listen, like I was going to Toronto Maple Leafs training camp that year. And I went into that training camp as the champ, like, the mindset, right? I'm going in here. I am the fighter. I am the guy that's making a name for myself. So sure enough, like that's the way I approached it. Like my first shift at training camp, I just steamrolled this guy. And then another guy comes over and then, challenges me. And then like, it was like within seconds of the training camp starting, like here I am, like two punching this guy and like, making a name for myself. I mean, I was in Canada and it was all across, Canadian news and like, I'm like feeling pretty big about myself, like this is Riley, this is the new Riley. But it was something like, again, it was nothing more than a mindset, obviously I would have loved to score 50 goals a year. It'd been a lot easier on my body and my brain and hands, but that wasn't in the cards. I realized that was not as skilled as I thought I was, from growing up being a skilled guy. Then realizing, there's a lot of really good hockey players in the world and I'm going up against the best, right? So nothing more than a mindset. Yeah, jacking yourself up, every night to fight was the game for me. It was a lot of Sudafed, a lot of coffee, a lot of stimulants, just going into this like warrior mode, right? I didn't really fight mad. There's only a couple of times I was really pissed off where I was trying to go after a guy and I actually got the guy. A lot of times I would try and get a guy when I was mad, and then I would land up fighting, their tough guy because, a lot of times like what the role is sticking up for your teammates. So there's cheap shots, there's guys running around acting tougher than they should be. I step in and puff my chest out, and then their guy, steps in and puffs his chest out. So you land up fighting the tough guy versus the guy you want, but generally never fought mad. But like jacking yourself up and really, just really thinking about the fight. Like I always talk about, like, I wish I would have like focused on playing hockey a little bit more, actually like playing the puck and like actually playing the game that I love. But I was so consumed by the role and the fight that like that was all my mind. Like standing there during the national anthem, it's just like just pacing back and forth. I just couldn't settle down and just relax into it because, I mean, obviously I was jacking my nervous system up, but also like the fight, it was on my mind all the time. I could never kick it.
So if there's a guy that's kind of, he scores a goal, or he checks a guy against the rink and he's skating around like kind of acting like a shit don't stink, does everybody like look down the bench and look at you and like it's time, like that's the guy, like go get him? And then do you just like get out there next time and just like, how does it work? Do you just go check him and then it just turns into a fight? It's obviously not a regular fight. Like you guys got pads on, you guys are like punching over each other. It's a part of the game, which is so fascinating to me.
Yeah, so there's different ways that this kind of breaks down. So like in the example you described, so a guy's hot dogging on the ice. Like if I'm on the bench, I might not get him that shift, right? He's on the ice unless like I'm able to pull a quick switch and the coach actually wants me on the ice and to deal with this. There's always ego, right? There's guys always kind of flexing, but some guys flex a lot more. Some guys flex a lot more when there's no toughness in the lineup. So. And generally who these guys are. So like if there's a little bit of chirping, it's like most guys just stand up on the bench and just chirp, right? It'd just be like, settle down, like there's a lot of, like F yous, whatever, all that stuff that's being said. The guy keeps going and, and now gets like physical with it. Like after the whistle, he's like a little bit of cheap shot to somebody or poking the goalie or, poking the goalie is like an absolute green light to go after a guy, right? So like that's like there's like unwritten rules of like what you don't do. So some guys like ride that line and see what they can get away with. But eventually, like if I get out there with him and he's already done a couple things, I'll get in his face. And I would always challenge him, right? I would be like, okay, well, like, let's go. Like I would offer the fight, knowing probably that guy is not going to, because generally the guys that act up like that aren't like the heavyweights, like the big dogs. Like those guys are just ready to fight. Like they don't have to do that. There's like a mutual respect there. So, probably like 99% of that example, there would be no fight on that because the guy wouldn't want to fight me, right? It would just be like, well, fuck, you'd be like, leave this guy alone, like keep him on the ice, he's garbage, what I mean? It'd be chirping, all that stuff. If I kept, forcing the issue, then eventually, like if they had a tough guy to counteract, probably on the ice already at this time, I'd probably fight that guy. It's kind of like this, it's like the streets, right? I mean, it's like there's like this like self-policing, this accountability factor. But my job was to at least attempt to try and keep the other guy accountable. Because a lot of times what happens with these guys, they lure you in, right? They'll act all tough and they want you to hit them or, take a penalty, and then they won't fight back. So then all of a sudden I'm in the penalty box putting my team down and they didn't get a penalty. So I'm always looking for the 5 minutes for fighting and the wash. They get 5 minutes for fighting. And then we're both sitting in the penalty box. The team's 5-on-5. I didn't put my team down. So there is strategy. If but like another example would be like just in the middle of the game, I'm on the forecheck and I'm trying to blow up a defenseman. Like I'm always trying to get the hits and try and generate the energy. So I blow up a guy, usually if it's a big hit, it's like, like everyone hears it, the crowd's like, whoa, and then everyone knows like, well, Riley's running around and like, we got to deal with him. So then someone will come after me and then the gloves drop and it's like a spontaneous type of fight. And then another example would be like if some shit happened and earlier in the game, and all of a sudden I'm on the ice with the other tough guy, and there's a face-off. I'm looking at the other guy, and before the puck even drops, I'm like, "We're going. We got to take care of that. That beef that happened, 4 shifts ago." So right out the puck drops, and then you were shedding the gloves, and we're fighting. So it's like a mutual. There's no controversy. It's just like business, right? It's like here we go, So sticking up for teammates, generating energy, down a couple goals. down a couple goals in your own building, you're definitely firing up the building, and definitely down a couple goals in the opponent's building, you're trying to generate a fight. And a lot of times they're coached to not fight. Well, why would you give the other team momentum? So then I'm like, okay, well then I'm gonna have to make you fight me. So then this is where I would go around and maybe poke the goalie, or do something a little bit cheap to try and stir up that fight. You know what I mean? It's about generating some energy and get the guys going and liven them up a little bit.
Oh man, game within the game. I really
Yeah,
appreciate you breaking
exactly.
that down, because I was so curious about how that works, as an athlete, and understanding the strategy behind it, but then also the emotion, and then the team dynamic, and like supporting, and then the energy of the stadium and the arena, and just like the momentum of everything that's going. It's really fascinating. Going from being a brawler and like just breaking records for fights and just crushing people, into who you are now, and this yogi, this peaceful, grounded energy, who is showing up and really supporting so many people in their own healing process. When did this shift take place? Was it gradual, or was there an initial awakening into this? I don't want to be a fighter anymore, and I want to really find the truth of who I am.
Yeah, so I was never a violent person. I think I've always been a peaceful person. And outside of hockey, I've been like two street fights and really just sticking up for my buddies. It wasn't like I was, engaging in it, or, trying to, I certainly wasn't the instigator in them. So, I was always a peaceful person, as a baseline foundational character. I think it was my last year, 2010, I was 28 years old. We had a new coach come in. My number one supporter was the coach that got fired. He was my minor league coach, and he was, a guy that believed in me probably the most. New coach comes in, doesn't have a real need for having a tough guy. He's like, I want a Stanley Cup, without toughness, and we're gonna be like the 13th forward. So I didn't play a whole lot that last year, so I had a lot of like soul searching to do. Like, I'm living my childhood dream, playing the NHL, but I'm fighting. Now I'm not even playing, and I was just kind of like, there's got to be more to this life. I felt really kind of unfulfilled. Again, making the most money I ever made, but it's like, if this is the dream, like, where's the happiness associated? Where's the fulfillment? So a lot of self-talk that year of just and self-discovery of like what this looks like going forward. Another year in my contract, then the following year, we landed up going to the finals actually that year, 2010, and lost to Chicago Blackhawks. And it was at the end of that season, I had a kind of like a heart to heart with the general manager, kind of like was vulnerable, and he kind of knew where I was at. I only played 17 games that year. I dressed every single warm up. So 82 game season, dressed every single warm up, and playoffs going all the way to the finals. So it's probably close to 100 games, played 17 of those games. So I was just a team guy, like he knew where I was at mentally. I was, a good team guy. That's why I was actually in warm ups and around the team. But he knew like emotionally and mentally, spiritually, I was, deflated. I was, beaten up.
What was that conversation like? What did you come to him with? And obviously, you guys have a relationship, so you were able to be honest and open, which is beautiful with somebody that's in the front office. But tell us, like, what was that conversation like?
Yeah, you know what? It was kind of led by him. He's like, I know this season didn't go exactly your way, and this and that, and he kind of like prefaced it with that, and he's like, how are you feeling going into next season? He's had a one-way contract, and he planted the seed. He's like, listen, he's like, there's a chance. You're coming back to camp fighting for a job, like literally back to where you were when you were 4 years ago, like fighting for a job. So I had expressed that I just like didn't feel right, and I couldn't separate the TBI, like again, repeated, head trauma. I've been in over 200 hockey fights, and if you're getting punched in the head 5-10 times, easy a fight. And if you want to, calculate what they would determine as any sort of concussion related issue, now it's like on the spectrum. Basically every head blow is a small concussion, right? I mean, in football, like every little head contact. So I'm like, not feeling great mentally, but how much of this is concussion? How much is this like my personal life, my issues, my substance abuse issues with alcohol, and how much of this is like me not being spiritually and emotionally fulfilled? You know what I mean? It was hard to separate the two because a lot of this the effects of concussions and this type of thinking is like it is some sort of anxiety and depression, right? It's like just the resentment and all this stuff. Like, hating the game or hating the coach or all this, all this stuff plays in. So I was just honest, like I just don't feel right, I just don't feel good, and I showed up every day and put on a smile and was a good teammate, but like when I left the rink, I wasn't exactly feeling as well as I portrayed myself to be. So I was just honest with my feelings. So the way it turned out, left the meeting. And again, I was dealing with some substance abuse with pills and mixing that with alcohol and stuff on the road specifically. I had a relationship with cannabis and mushrooms, growing up in the middle of Canada, not a shortage of cannabis and mushrooms. So I had a relationship with them. It was very misunderstood, very, very recreational, I guess you could call it. I had 2 surgeries after that season, one on my finger and one on my nose. And I told myself I wasn't going to touch the pills, and I was just going to use cannabis to manage the pain and the inflammation, and I did. So I proved to myself that I no longer needed that. I could actually rely on plant medicine.
What was the intention there, like before going into surgery, that I don't want to do pills? Was it because you were already dealing with substance abuse, maybe you got off them before and you didn't want to get re-addicted to them from the surgery? Because I know they prescribe them after surgery just to do pain management, but then it's hard to get off those things once you go through it. Was that the intention there?
Yeah, I was already misusing them, right? So I knew I had like a problem, and I wanted to address, again, being an accountable guy, right? I was in the business of accountability, so I needed to be honest with myself and understand where some of the shit was coming from. And being honest with it, it was alcohol consumption, and it was the pills. It was easy on the road, muscle relaxers and the Percocets, right? So my intention was to prove to myself, like, you don't need those, especially for, pain management after post surgery. It's like, that's what is prescribed. But I wanted to prove to myself I didn't need that. And if I did need a pain management tool, it would have been cannabis, which proved to be successful and really kind of like really jump started my belief and really understanding of, cannabis in this specific instance, that it is an amazing, therapeutic and medicinal tool. Um, so these 2 surgeries, again, I think I was able to let go of this pill use. Actually, since then, I've never touched a pill. So I kind of like, that was like one of the kind of letting go, and detaching from these bad habits that I had. I also made a decision then to stop drinking. Actually stopped drinking for a year. And then like 3 weeks later, I went back home to Winnipeg, and I get a phone call from the general manager, and he says, "Listen," he's like, "there's a job opening up with the Flyers minor league team. The assistant coach's house got struck by lightning and burnt down. He's not coming back this year. And there's this job opening." So instantly I was like, well, this is it. Like, this is an opportunity for me to exit stage left, bow out of the game with honor. I was loyal to the Flyers. The Flyers are now being loyal to me, actually, believing in me enough that I could, work with the youth and to help develop the younger players. So it was in that moment that I was like, okay, like this is it. Like, whether or not I'm going to be coaching, hockey for the rest of my life, that's not really the point here. It's really kind of like stay in the game, exit that lifestyle of, ramping myself to fighting, and then like the party, right? So I'm now on the other side of the fence. So it helped me, with that decision I made around not drinking. So it was just like, again, it's like putting it out to the universe, and like, you're feeling, and you're asking, the great spirit for some sort of guidance, and all of a sudden it's like served to you on a silver platter, where I was like, in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I told Paul Holmgren, general manager, I said, let me sleep on this and I'll call you tomorrow with a decision. But I knew in my heart, like that was it. Like my childhood dream, like lived and lived it. And even though it wasn't exactly the way I envisioned it, I'd lived it, fulfilled it. And then now it was a time of closing that chapter. And I was okay with that. You know what I mean? A lot of people hang on to the dream because they don't know what's next. And I didn't really know what's next besides coaching. But I also knew that it was an opportunity for me to really engage in this practice of self-care, right? It was actually like taking care of myself. It's like resting and regenerating and all these things that we talk about as athletes, but I wasn't doing. Like sleep for me wasn't like a priority. Regeneration wasn't a priority. It was just like, well, let's go party. Let's go like self-medicate. Let's go, it's like you were living the life, right? So
Isn't
yeah,
that fascinating?
yeah, I know, it's wild. I look back and I'm like, I couldn't even, I can't even look back and call myself an elite athlete, like, because I wasn't. Like I just certainly didn't take care of myself as one. I did some things right, but I did a lot of things really, really wrong. And therefore it's like, it's karma, right? I drove myself into the grave, the athletic grave, if you will. However, this opportunity presented itself. It was an opportunity to really start taking care of myself, get that rest, start reading books, like really start looking inwards and then really kind of just understanding some of these plant medicines, right? It was the cannabis, understanding the science to support the way I was feeling, my experiences, the mushrooms, that was a huge part of like dealing with my concussion related issues as well as like transitioning, right? There was like this, you talked about before we got on, like, it's like the shedding of the old, right? It's kind of like shedding that old Riley and really tapping into, my true self. And it really kind of made sense of this pretty quickly, honestly. I will say that after a year or so, I did start drinking a little bit. Like it wasn't like the way I was. I wasn't getting drunk, but I would have a glass of wine or so, now and then. And I didn't drink the beer anymore because again, I was like really, really in tune with how it was making me feel. Like I was like, man, I was drinking a lot of beer growing up. Like my belly's out to here. I got the wheat belly and all this other shit. But I started to identify with like how things made me feel. I was like, even like two glasses of wine, I'm like, this is fucking with my sleep. So I got to tail this back. And I haven't drank in 3 years, but it was a process of elimination, right? It's just like eliminating things that no longer serve you, that are bogging you down, that are robbing you of power and energy. And it's a process, right? Until you're really aware of it, you don't really understand how much some things, bog you down. It's like thinking bogs you down, people bog you down. Obviously food can bog you down, a substance abuse, different thing in all its forms can bog you down. So it was a slow process of elimination, and it was more elimination than addition, right? It was more like just like getting rid of the shit that's poisoning you, and really kind of purifying and cleansing the vessel, and just being a little more clear on my intention and purpose.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. So you went. It's really good that and beautiful that you had that transition going from player to coach, because that seems to be like a really like soft landing into the transition, still being around the game, being connected to it, not having to just rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak, and really kind of start confronting. How long were you a coach for? You said, I think it was like 7 years, 7, 8 years?
7 years, yeah. Mhm.
7 years as a coach. So you're still around the game, but you're starting to awaken to yourself and feeling how things are connecting with you. And it is really fascinating how, as professional athletes, I mean, the culture and of just like partying and substance abuse and drinking, and it's a part of like our collective societal issue of like it's just normalized. It's not. I wouldn't have called myself an alcoholic, like but I love to party and drink beers, and it's like the definition of using that stuff in that way. As you started eliminating this stuff, but you're still around the culture of hockey, and you're starting to wake up. What was it like? Was it challenging being around the guys and in the locker room and in that culture? And kind of how was it received as you were starting to wake up and take better care of yourself? Were you sharing these things with your players, with your teammates, or was it kind of a solo journey until you got done and kind of got away from the game?
No, it was interesting. I think it was well received. Guys, there's a lot of guys that go through substance abuse issues and addiction programs, right? So like sobriety in sports, especially, in this organization, the Flyers organization, there's a lot of sober executives, that have gone through hell and back. So, it is respected, right? And again, I was on the other side of the fence. So really the only people I had to kind of answer to for that was the other coaching staff, right? Going on the road or going for beers and I wouldn't, right? I would go out and eat, and it was totally fine. The players, they're partying, doing their thing. They don't give a shit about what I'm doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, but at the same time, this is when I started really being vocal around starting with hemp and cannabis, right? So that off season, I started really getting into hemp proteins and hemp seeds, as a digestible protein source. And I actually got, from Winnipeg, Manitoba Harvest, hemp, probably the largest hemp food company on the planet. Donated a bunch of protein and seeds, and I got into the locker room. So like I was already really vocal around cannabis and hemp as a viable alternative So I think guys were kind of seeing what I was doing. However, like the protein and the seeds, this is going back 2000, well, now 2011, because I retired in 2010. It stayed on the shelf 24 hours and it was removed by the strength and conditioning and medical staff as a banned substance, right? And it was hemp seeds. It was sold at Whole Foods, and hemp protein, because it was not, whatever it was, WADA certified, or whatever the hell the certification was that they needed to be in the locker room. So I think they kind of saw that I was like actually integrating some sort of alternatives. I was being more public around my cannabis use. I started a nonprofit back then called Hemp Heals Foundation. I was doing this music festival in Philly called the Hemp Heals Music Festival, and I was just showing cannabis in all its forms, and hemp in all its forms. Just like the foods and the body care products, and the building materials, and the textiles and all that stuff. So people quickly knew that I was like not just just sober, but like actually trying to promote a more sustainable alternative, pain management. A lot of guys that drank a ton didn't even really recognize that they were self-medicating. It was just like, yeah, there's a party and there's some fun, but really what you see is a lot of guys are drinking by themselves after games, sitting on the back of the bus and drinking beers. So it's not even necessarily about the party. A lot of times it's about self-medicating. So I was really open about cannabis is an alternative, pain management alternative, mental health, just a drug diversion, if you will, right? Harm reduction, because alcohol and pills, I mean, swallowed up more people than probably any other substances on the planet, right? And then there's cannabis kind of sidelined. So I just felt the need to speak for the trees, and I did that early, and got a little pushback originally, but then quickly, people were kind of making sense of what I was saying, what I was trying to do. I mean, obviously wasn't the only person or the first person to do it, but
you were early. You were really early.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I love that. Where did this connection to cannabis come from? Because there's such a stigma around it, especially speaking out so early. And, I'm still dancing with my relationship. I can notice when I'm using it to escape and numb out if I'm really stressed or I got a lot going on. But when I use it with intention and presence and to connect with the spirit of the plant and use it to get into my body. And I love doing yoga and smoking a little bit of cannabis and working out even, and even just meditating. It's just such a powerful tool to connect to spirit. Where did this evolution of your relationship with cannabis, like when did you start using? And then when did it start becoming, okay, this thing is actually really powerful tool? Was it learning about the science and the properties of it to help with pain management, and then it kind of led into this deeper relationship, and obviously the plant as a whole and the use case for it in way more than just the THC molecule, but all the things that you can use it for? Talk about the relationship with cannabis and how it's evolved throughout your life.
Yeah, it's certainly evolved. I mean, the first time I used cannabis was 15 years old, growing up in Canada. I've been using cannabis since then, very regularly. I didn't really make much sense of it, how much it was helping me until I retired. Again, fighting, from 20 to 28, and I always use cannabis after the game, but I also probably used, alcohol and everything else too. But I always noticed how much it helped me sleep. I didn't really make the connection of how much anxiety it was helping me with, and even the pain management piece, because again, there was like a lot of other substances in there. And again, I wasn't very mindful either. I was just like, this mindless warrior, just like go hard and all that. I didn't make much sense of its true medicinal properties until I retired. I read a book called Hemp for Health, and it broke down the entire cannabis plant and all its, viability, the industrial uses, as well as broke down the medicinal components of the plant, the CBD, all these minor cannabinoids, as well as THC, because most people just knew what THC was, and it was the devil's lettuce, and there was only one form of cannabis, and that was it, right? So I had this aha moment, made sense of it as a medicinal tool. So then I started really using it, practically and intentionally. And it was just more, again, surface level, physical body healing. It was like, oh, pain management. Oh, it's, going to use some CBD for my concussions, the anti-inflammatory, neurogenesis properties of the CBD. And, but as that, evolved, and as I started working through a lot of this pain and inflammation, obviously integrating yoga helped me remove inflammation, not just leaning on cannabis, and outside substances to help with that. Did I start feeling better so I could use less cannabis? I started feeling better mentally. I guess what I would have called, my concussion-related issues soon disappeared. So I was feeling better, and so I no longer needed it for those specific reasons. But I started realizing this is spiritual medicine. This is way beyond the physical. This is way beyond the way we're traditionally taught. In these medical cannabis programs, it's like, and trust me, I mean, and I fully believe in it, in those forms, because it's helping a lot of people, with all kinds of different disease states. But like taking it a step further, I think like I see this cannabis culture that's almost bastardized cannabis again. Like we've done this, but with tobacco, we've done this with yoga, we've done this with all these these sacred things. We just bastardize it, right? And we breed up the THC, we breed out the CBD, so the plants are imbalanced. We're over consuming like 90% THC dabs, and like we're just frying our nervous system. I realized like, wow, this is sacred plant medicine. Like we're just misusing this, just like pretty much everything else. So I kind of reformed my relationship with that and started being more intentional. Just as you mentioned, being very intentional, before yoga or meditation. But then like the dose would decrease. I was realizing like at a certain dose, I was maybe more in my head versus like more looking within and being a little bit more in my body. So it was more like getting into like microdosing cannabis for those specific mindful situations. And then like in the last couple of years, getting into cannabis more in like in ceremonial settings. I'm actually going in June to work with a master shaman in Arizona, and all she works with is cannabis. And then there's like the relationship continues to evolve where you're legitimately and intentionally fasting from cannabis, and then using it much like other plant medicines where you're really going deep, and it lands up being like a psychedelic experience, right? So completely different. Intention and angle than I had previously used cannabis. It's the same exact plant, but it's like a mindset. It's a relationship, as you mentioned. It's evolved. So now it's like my relationship has evolved so much where I use less and less, more microdosing, just kind of like ease through when I need to. Use it as a creative tool, as it's always been known for. But it's always been playing with that fine line of like using cannabis and using too much. And then, it's like you're kind of chasing this feeling or, trying to retract it. But it takes a lot of experience to kind of find that sweet spot. It's easy to overconsume anything, right? I mean, look at, food and alcohol and everything else, right? It's like, it's easy to overconsume. It's cannabis, very easy to overconsume, especially if you're burning herb versus like actually taking a pre-measured capsule of some sort that's 2.5 milligrams of THC, which is a true microdose. So just very mindful cannabis use. Yeah. So I know long-winded there, but yeah, certainly evolved. And now I feel the need to kind of be a voice for cannabis as a spiritual tool, and raising consciousness. I mean, I spent time down in Jamaica the last 3 years, and had the opportunity to spend a few nights in indigenous Rastafarian village, and like, their relationship with cannabis is certainly different than most of the Western world, right? It's like there is a respect there. There's about raising vibration. It's all about these energies of mindful, intentional ways to raise vibration, level up, feel better, and vibe out.
Tell me about that experience with the Rastafarians. Like you went down there and hung out with them. Like what was that? Tell us how that experience impacted you and like what you learned, because I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, it's interesting how it all happened. It was actually through our mushroom operation down in Jamaica. We're cultivating mushrooms and holding mushroom retreats, psilocybin mushrooms specifically. And two of the people that hold ceremonies is a lady named Sita, and then Micah, who's indigenous Rastafarian. He's 32 years old, and his parents were Rastas, and he actually himself started this Rastafarian village. So what we went before the retreat to test out the mushrooms to make sure that they were as potent as we thought they were, and to just experience them before we had 10 other people use them. So
Mm-hmm.
they held ceremony for us in the indigenous Rastafarian village. A couple old guys playing the djembe and some singing, and it was around a big fire, and it was like certainly an amazing experience. And then like sitting there after and reflecting on like understanding the culture. I mean, I grew up a big Bob Marley fan and understood like what the surface level understanding of what a Rastafarian is, but to understand like how powerful these people are and how they came to be, based on basically being slaves below poverty and like treated as like scum of the earth back like 500 years when, the Spanish owned the African slaves and brought them to Jamaica to work on the sugarcane plantations. They chopped off their hair, took their names away, gave them gave them new names. And then a lot of these people scurried off into the hills and basically had to regenerate a life and an identity. And that's, how the Rastafarians came to be. And how powerful of a movement it has been, because then you fast forward 450 years or whatever it lands up being, and Bob Marley comes on the scene, and it's like you talk about raising vibration and speaking truth. Like Bob Marley was a prophet, and he was speaking God's word, and the music is mainstream, and the ripple has penetrated all pockets of the planet through vibration, through music, through love, right? And you see, if you go into Philly, you go to China, you go to mid Europe, you're going to find Rastafarian people that subscribe to what he was teaching. So the hearing it from their mouths and seeing them live it and being engulfed in nature and their connection to nature and the Great Spirit. Was super powerful. I mean, I grew up in the middle of Canada around a lot of Native Americans, and I never understood the depth of what they were representing, and the earth and Mother Earth and Father Sky and the totem and the animals and all that stuff. And it was all of a sudden now I'm kind of experiencing this in a completely different way down here with the Rastas. They were saying the exact same thing, and I had kind of had this like holy shit, like when you hear oneness and connection to source and all this stuff, like I was there like seeing it and living it and feeling it. So it's certainly like really accelerated my spiritual growth, I believe, this experience. And I became friendly with these guys, and I'm actually taking djembe drum lessons from one of them, and virtually on Zoom. And it's like
Amazing.
It's pretty wild how connected I feel to their culture and their people. And that was through mushrooms. And then the cannabis piece. Most people think of Rastafarians as just smoking cannabis, which is a huge part of their culture. And I asked Micah, the main guy that brought us there. I was like, do Rastas meditate? You never think, you think of a Rastafari, you never see him like in lotus meditating. And he kind of smiles and chuckles. He's like, yeah, we just, our meditation isn't like, like a Hindu or Buddhist meditation. We call it holding a vibe. That's why the music's so huge in their cultures. It's just kind of feeling the music and vibing with the beat of the drum and and the reggae music. And it's like it is a form of meditation, obviously, right? I mean, meditation is beyond sitting in lotus, quieting the mind. There's other forms. So it made sense of a lot of things for me, where it's like it's not always about sitting in lotus, which I do, or sitting on a meditation stool. But it's okay, to appreciate music and just like sit, and sit with the music and vibe out. So super profound and powerful experience. And I don't know. So it's one of those things that you just have an appreciation for their culture and also mankind. Like there is hope. I feel like we're walking off a cliff here as a society. But like at one point, the most oppressed group of people to rise up and to be able to have a ripple on the planet like the culture has is pretty profound. So it's spirit. It's their connection to source and spirit is what helped them survive all the process, the persecution and the oppression and governments coming in and burning their shit and the villages and what I mean. Like they were hardcore. They were really, really attacked, just like the Native Americans, chop off their braids, chop off their hair. They were coming in and chopping off their dreads. But it was a way of their identity. Like they created an identity from nothing, from once being slaves to that. So super inspiring, right? I mean, it just gives mankind hope, and it really just teaches you like the power of spirit, of the energy of love. Like that's what they represent: nature and love and raising vibration, consciousness. So we're not doomed, as doom
Mm,
and gloom as the world is. There's hope. And it
yeah.
starts with ourselves, you know what I mean? And it starts with taking care of our own vibration and our own being, and then, and hopefully being a ripple and helping other people find that vibration as well.
Oh man, what a time to be alive where we can connect with all of these different indigenous ancient cultures and ways of being and really connect with the frequency of they're all connecting to the same thing. It's connecting to the present moment. It's connecting to the inner world, the self, nature, the oneness that we're all connected to. And you can look, like we live now where we have access to just travel and the information and the internet and the opportunity to really sit and connect, and we get to cultivate and connect with all these different cultures and ceremonies and plant medicines and integrate them into our own being. And I know you're passionate about this too, is really bringing it to the Western world so that we can all start waking up from this, you know colonialism. Like, we just conquered the world and now we're trying to heal from it, and it's a really, really big thing. You talked about psychedelics. I know you're really passionate. You have the program down in Jamaica. When did this plant medicine, psychedelic plant medicine journey start? Because I know you've had that relationship with cannabis for quite a while, and it's evolved similar to me. When did you start getting into more of the psychedelic compounds, and take us through that journey? When did those start coming online?
Yeah, honestly, the same time the cannabis piece came online. Again, first time eating mushrooms was 15 years old. Very recreational settings, festivals, parties, going to the lake, not understanding the true spiritual nature. However, I always kind of really felt connected to, what I would define as source, and the great spirit. But, having no one really teaching me about it, and really having no one, like, no real mentor through it. It was just, again, a lot of times mixing with alcohol, the party, like a lot of distractions, right? So at the same time I retired in 2010, when I started using cannabis mindfully, is when I had really kind of sat with myself in silence the first time on 5 grams of mushrooms. It was like, the Terrence McKenna. I made sense of this as like almost going into it as a true meditation, right? I'm sitting with myself and there's no distractions, right?
What was the inspiration for that? Was it intuitive? Like, I feel like I need to go in with this mushroom, or was it something you were learning, reading? Was there a podcast, book? What was the inspiration?
I think it was a little bit of, Terrence McKenna, and, Alan Watts type stuff, as well as reading, like as I mentioned earlier, the Hemp for Health book. I read a psilocybin mushroom book there shortly after, and I started to make sense of its spiritual attributes and like really what it was like. And so hearing Terrence McKenna say, 5 grams in darkness, and like understanding the spiritual nature of this, and meditation surface level, right? I was like, shit. I'm like, I need to, and then like dealing with my concussion related stuff. I was like, I just need to sit with myself and figure this shit out. Like, I got myself in this mess. You got to figure yourself out here. So that was the intention going into it, and it was incredibly profound. I feel like almost instantly I was able to kind of shed, the hockey player, the fighter. You know what I mean? Like, not, it's like, yeah, people still like, yeah, you're the fighter. You still to this day with, identify me with that, but I don't identify myself with that. And I didn't, like, after that first really large dose, the quote ceremony. I'm not even sure if I even like really went into it like in a true ceremony. It was just like, I'm going into this with the intention of being by myself, in silence, in darkness, and just like being.
What
Um,
came up for you? What was the big aha moment? What was the big realization that was presented through this experience? Because this is the first high dose psilocybin experience you had
by myself, yeah.
by
Like,
yourself.
where
Okay.
there's no distractions, right? There's no
So you're
like,
not socially like connecting
yeah,
and like
yeah,
having
yeah.
fun. You're like, I'm going in.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think the two main ones was that, like was letting go of what I thought I was, right? It was like, because I identified my whole life, as you could imagine, as you probably did with football. It's like, I'm a hockey player. Everyone growing up, it was like, you're a hockey player, and then I took on the fighter, and you're the fighter. It was like immediately like letting go of that. It's like, not you, Riley, right? It's not you. So it gave me the sense of like this almost like letting go. So all this space, I created all this space where I was like almost like in the moment, realized there was a huge purpose for me. I didn't know exactly what it all entailed, but I knew it was something much larger than I ever thought. And when it was speaking for the trees, it was speaking for nature. It was like just speaking for something much grander than yourself. Um, and then the other one was, I think it was around like forgiveness and compassion. It was like just being softer on yourself. It was like forgiving yourself for, like, for thinking that you've let people down, and just being hard on yourself and all this stuff, and just forgiveness in general is like this, again, like letting go of like this emotional baggage that you're carrying, and then just having more compassion on the other side for self and for other people. It's just like everyone's just trying to do their best, and I would call it ignorance. I just didn't know. I didn't know any
Mm.
better. So forgiving myself for all the mistakes, because you're beating yourself up. Oh, I should have been better. You should have had a better career. You know what I mean? You should have drank less. You should have partied less. Like, you're beating yourself up for all these foolish things that you did. But then it was just like this sense of just like, it's okay. You made those mistakes. It all happened for a reason. Now you're on the other side of this, and now you have the ability to heal. And then once you're healed, you're able to help other people transition and heal and do whatever work you can. And just kind of helped me define this purpose of much greater than, my really narrow purpose, which was like, my purpose was, my goal is to play in the NHL, which, it's great to dream big, but that's like a pretty small dream in the grand scheme of, what you could be dreaming, right? And what you could be creating. We talk about actually being of service and attacking the world in a selfless manner. It was very selfish, right? It was very egocentric what I was doing. Even though I was sticking up for my teammates, there was still a self-serving piece to that. Street cred and all this other stuff, how tough you got to look to earn that and all that stuff. So letting go of all that, forgiving yourself, compassion. It was just like, come on the other side of like, I felt like a new person. I was like, holy shit, like, this is incredible. I got a completely different perspective on life. And this is when I just like, everything accelerated for me. I understood meditation more, yoga. I was getting into all these, like, all these things that were like, if you were to ask me 2 years before that, it'd be like, yoga is not for me. Lifting weights is for me. It's like, meditation is not for me. Jacking myself up on, Sudafed and stimulants is me, because I need to carry this energy of like, macho man Riley around the locker room, not carry around a soft, gentle energy around the world. You know what I mean? Which I now take pride in, right?
Did this come first from this 5-gram psilocybin ceremony? Is you started doing yoga after this? Like, how did you integrate that experience? Because these are, I truly believe for athletes, these tools, I mean, they've had a profound impact on my life in that identity piece, like being able to peel back the layers of who I thought I was, who I pursued to be, what I achieved greatness at, how I received love, like all of these things are just stacked on top, being able to peel that away. But then the challenge is, understanding that, like, oh, I am more than I thought. There is this deeper knowing within me that I'm connecting to. But how do you integrate that? That's when the real work starts. And so how did you integrate this 5-gram profound? It seems like it was a real pivotal moment in shifting the trajectory of your life. What was it like kind of immediately following that and then integrating those, and what path did it lead you on after?
It's interesting. It didn't happen as like I was intentionally saying, okay, now I'm going to integrate this. I wasn't even that evolved yet to even understand that. It was just a natural progression of like, okay, I come out on this other side, like really spacious, and things just started to make sense for me. So like yoga was like one of the first things, a nutritional healing. So I just really started connected to my diet. It was like, because I think what was another thing that came up was like impurities and toxicity in your body is like a sacred vessel. So immediately, not that I wasn't like, I was that last year, I was kind of getting into eating healthier, and being a little bit more, a little bit more in tune with what I was putting in my body, but it's still like really flawed. So nutritional healing and yoga. So again, it wasn't like intentionally, okay, this is part of my integration process. It was like a natural thing because I had these downloads of like impurities and cleansing the vessel, and and kind of again lifting so much weight for so many years and being stiff. I was just like trying to find a way to just feel better, bring more balance. So these subtle understandings of what I was trying to do were there enough to get me where I needed to go. So I got introduced to yoga, through the cult of the body. It was much like most people. It's like, oh, I just want to feel better, and really wasn't even much alignment with the spine. I didn't even understand that. It was like more stretching, right? flexibility. I had never been flexible. However, as you practice yoga more, it just keeps peeling back the layers, the layers, the layers. And all of a sudden I started to understand spine health and the chakras and the spiritual nature. And then I started understanding like the 8 limbs of yoga and understanding this is like a way of life. This isn't just a physical practice of exercise. So it just like kept like, as like it just kept opening up more and more, new dimension after new dimension, integrating nutritional healing, now sacred plant medicine, and really getting into after a few years, really actually having a true meditation practice. So just like it was just progressive and integrative. But then I kind of had this understanding of like what integration actually was. And I was doing it the whole time, but I never really put a term on it. It was just like, it just naturally happened for me. Just based on, getting kicked in the butt and kicked in the face by the mushrooms so hard that you're forced to change, right? Once you're accountable, you're responsible. It brought in a lot of accountability. It's like, because my intention going into it was like, Riley, you got yourself into this mess. You're going to get yourself out of this mess. So the intelligence of the mushrooms has a way of like, making sense of some of the stuff. And it's very gentle. It's very soft in the sense. It's like, don't be so hard on yourself. Like that was just like a part of your life. That was just like a temporary thing to get you where you needed to be, do the work you need to do, to get you where you needed to be, to help more people, to help people first and help more people as you keep evolving. So it's forever, right? I mean, it's like I'm not going to sit here and say like I've figured it out. I mean, I know nothing. Like I'm just grateful enough that I've had these experiences that I've been able to salvage, some darkness in my life and turn it into light to get to a point where I'm today. But I just feel like I almost feel like I'm just getting started. Honestly, I'm just like full of energy and full of spirit that I just want to just want to emit. Yeah, it's been amazing, and then the groups of people and the circles you run with keep evolving, and the special people. I mean, like we get connected on this only because we're on similar paths, right? I mean, if I was still sitting at the bar, probably wouldn't be having this podcast, or vice versa. You know what I mean? It's just like your vibe attracts your tribe. Just keep getting introduced to more awesome people, interesting people, healers, with different modalities. And then you just keep learning from more and more people, and you just keep integrating that. And it's just, it's a beautiful ride. Honestly, I'm so grateful.
Yeah. It's like Pandora's box. It's like, once you start waking up and knowing like what feeling good feels like, it's like you notice when you put something bad in your body, or you're over consuming alcohol, or you're using cannabis in an unintentional way. You can feel it, you notice it, you're like, I just don't want to feel like this anymore. When I don't do yoga for a few days and my body is stiff, it's like, I got to go to the mat. And that's one thing for me. I found a lot of gratitude because there's a lot of forgiveness I've gone through too, right? And a lot of those pain points of how I treated my body and how I treated my head, and like, why did I do that? Sacrificing like my longevity and my health and like all these things. And, in my healing process, I found deep gratitude for the daily pain I experience in my body, because without it, I wouldn't have as strong a yoga practice. Without it, I wouldn't take care of the inflammation that I'd get from eating bad foods, and like being able to really watch my nutrition. So all of that led me into a deeper practice of caring for my body because of that. So it's really beautiful. Where did this? I'm curious where this deeper spiritual connection came from, because I grew up in a Christian household, which high percentage of Westerners do. I'm not sure what your upbringing with connection to creation was, but I had to break down a lot of programming, indoctrination, and it was one of the most challenging things ever, is like those deep-seated psychological stories that your entire reality is based on. Like clearing the lens of that was really challenging. So I'm curious if you've always had this connection to something that is greater than yourself, if you had the language for it when you were younger, and how that process evolved. I'm sure working with psychedelics and plant medicines and has really helped deepen that connection and getting more connected to the ancient indigenous cultures and experiencing different ceremonial containers and stuff like that. But where did that start evolving? Because I know you said when you when you got that opportunity to coach, it was like, oh, thank you. Like I was like, what am I going to do? And this thing came, and it was almost divine the way it happened, and these synchronicities that happen. And I truly believe they're happening around us all the time. It's just, are we awake enough and open enough and present enough to listen to them? But I'm just curious how that process has unfolded for you over your life.
It's interesting, and I made sense of a lot of this after the fact, actually, even through one of my ayahuasca experiences, making sense of some of this stuff. So I grew up much like you. I grew up in a Christian Protestant home, going to church every Sunday. My mom was German Mennonite. My dad's French Canadian. You can imagine, join together and marry and have children, and kind of come in the middle in the Christian Protestant, right? Hardcore, like my Sunday school, youth group, and the whole bit. There's stuff that I appreciated, and there was stuff that I always questioned. It just didn't seem to answer my questions. I always felt like unfulfilled with the answers that the pastor was giving or whoever I was talking to. There was just
What were
like,
some of those questions? Do you remember?
well, it's just like, well, if God cares so much, why is there so much? Why is there so much of this? And I never could fully understand, like, Jesus, like the man, the God, making sense of what God actually was. I always represented, again. I think this is probably most people through Christian faith, is like you make sense of God through a deity like Jesus, right? And I just, like, nothing makes sense. Well, how can this man be this and this? And what is he, like a puppeteer? Like, you know what I mean? Is he telling us what to do? Like, all this other stuff. Like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of misunderstandings. And if he's such a loving God, why is there so much, like, war and all this other stuff, right? And it's these questions that are just like, God, like, these aren't good answers you're giving me. Like, this, like, oh, you just gotta have faith and all this other stuff. Yeah, well, like, and I make sense of a lot of these teachings after the fact. But what I did make sense of is, like, when I was 15 years old, when I first ate mushrooms. I didn't know it at the time, but I'm looking back on my life, and that was like the moment when I kind of like separated from the church. This is when I, like, told my mom I wasn't going to. I really didn't want to go to church anymore, because I felt in that moment, like when I had that experience, that there was something way bigger than what's being taught at the church. I had a way more spiritual experience in all of my years going to the church and Sunday school. 15 years old, eating mushrooms. Again, it was like at a lake with my buddies. It wasn't like, like in ceremony, like, with the intention of this, but it was enough to kind of, like, you mentioned, like, kind of break down some of these programs. It was like, I realized then that I was a co-creator with God. I was like, wow, I feel like God. Like, I feel like this God energy, like this source energy that's not Jesus. Maybe he's a representative, like a spiritual leader, like, like a lot of these other guys. But I kind of just, like, in that moment said, you know what, like, there's something way more outside of what the church is teaching, and I feel called to follow that.
How did your mom respond to that? Did you tell her it was because of this psychedelic
No,
experience?
definitely not. No, but what's funny is that, like, when I did my ayahuasca retreat 3 years ago, the first 45 minutes, an hour was like living hell, where I was like reliving my childhood friction with my parents and making sense of, like, where it came from. That's where I kind of, like, made sense of, like, that's why I was so, like, because my sisters were both, like, exactly the way that they are and taught, and I mean, I love them all to death, but my perspective was so different, and I made sense of, like, where this was coming from. It was like, because I had been introduced to spirit in a different way. The intelligence of the mushrooms actually helped open me up in some capacity, whether I was aware of it or not. It kind of, like, took off the binders and in that moment, and so I had to, like, this awakening. But the ayahuasca experience was really kind of showing me, like, where that spiritual friction came from. That friction growing up was like, was early parts was in around when I had my first psychedelic experiences. It just, like, opened up the heart. It opened up this, like, world of real vast spirituality versus, like, boxed in, which I perceived as boxed in spirituality. But then making peace with, it was like making peace with my mom's path and making peace with my path, and just being, it's okay, like, respecting hers. I'm not trying to trying to preach mine, and just being okay with mine. It was like this, like, just forgiveness thing in that situation. But I guess where I was going with it, it was like, so that happened at a young age, where that I kind of, like, I say abandoned the church. I just felt like I could get more, I say, on my own, and I didn't even understand it yet, but I just, like, believed. I don't like using the word belief. I knew that I needed to follow my heart, and that the intelligence from within was guiding me where I needed to go, if you will, but
Mm.
without really understanding it. I was still like really wrapped up in the material world, egocentric hockey space and all this other stuff. But it was just like this trust that I had in myself, that that the Great Spirit was like was guiding me. But I didn't like it wasn't like going back to Jesus, or I didn't identify with anything outside of an energy, I guess, if you will, that was guiding me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, when you have that experience and connection to whatever you want to call it, the unnameable, really, when you have that experience, that personal connection, like nobody can take that away from you.
mhm.
And it's almost like the church is created, at least definitely currently, to not allow for those experiences to happen, because they know as soon as you actually connect, there's spiritual experiences and stuff that happen in church. I'm not discounting that. And it's that knowing of, this is not my path and I want to explore, and I'm curious and I want my curiosity to be honored. And I'm curious how that, because I've been dealing with this with my parents as well, and it's been really challenging, and it's kind of gone up and down as I've been on this healing path of deep forgiveness and acceptance, and I've gotten to a good place with them. But it always comes back to, they're evangelical, so they have this deep seated belief that it's their job to help save people and share the word of Christ. And I can see the root of where they're coming from is love, because the
Mhm.
root of fear is love. And they love me so much that their belief is that I'm going to go to hell for eternity because of what I believe, which I don't even think they know what I believe, because they aren't curious enough to actually listen to my
Right.
perspective. But there's this, I'm trying to be around them and accept them and love them, but they're always trying to save me. Like every conversation comes back to like God, and then I'm trying to I'm not putting my beliefs on them. I'm just like sharing, like trying to widen their perspective, because they're coming at me, and it always turns into this like tumultuous like
Mhm.
disconnection, and it's really challenging. So I'm curious how that relationship, when you were 15 and you started disconnecting from the church, what did that lead to as far as family dynamics, and how has that evolved as you've been on this healing path with your relationship with your mom and your family?
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, it created friction, right? Because they knew best, they knew what was best for me, and it was going to church, right? Because that's all they knew, right? They didn't have another perspective, and I understand that now. However, it's like you can't force anybody to do anything, right? And I don't know if you have kids.
Yeah, I got a 2-year-old. He just turned 2
Yeah, so
yesterday.
there you go, awesome, happy
Yeah.
birthday. So I got a 6-year-old now and a 7-year-old, and it's like you can only get them to do so much, right? But what I've learned is you can't get people to do anything. You can't force anybody to do anything. So I found like the more they pushed me to buy in, to subscribe something that I really wasn't subscribing to, the more they pushed me away. Like the more I didn't want to be around the house, the more I couldn't wait to go to my buddy's house and smoke weed. You know what I mean? I couldn't wait to go drink, and versus like maybe having some understanding of where I was at and the way I was feeling. Maybe I try to understand where I was coming from. So maybe I didn't feel pushed away. You know what I mean? Didn't feel unwelcome. You know what I mean? From my belief systems. So that was that was definitely a wedge. And I love my parents, and our relationship is much better now. But now it's almost like not talked about. It's like kind of the way I mentioned on the ayahuasca. It's like I know what they believe, and to your point, I'm not even sure if they totally know what I believe in. And maybe surface level based on what they see. But it's really not. It's a mutual peace to like let's just let it be. Like I'm not pushing nothing on them no more, because I went through a phase that I was trying. I was preaching the cannabis and this. I was like better than Tylenol. All this. I mean, I was like. You're not going to force anybody to do something they don't want to do until they're ready to receive it and willing to learn on their own. Like, just let them be. So I've had to accept that. That was a flaw that I went through there. And then they're no longer kind of forcing me or like putting pressure on me. Before it was like, you really should go to church. You really should do this. You really should. It's just like, okay, I respect him where he's at, and vice versa. So it's taken a long time, right? I mean, it's because it's like I get it. As a parent, you just want what's best for your child. It is coming from a good place. But I mean, ignorance is a real thing, and if you don't know anything more than the bubble you're in, then you don't know how much more there is out there. So you can't relate to someone else's experiences. So you just see them as like foolish, or the devil. You know what I mean? And that was another thing too. Like you asked about like what questions did you have? Like there's a lot of fear in religion, right? A lot of fear through the church. Everything is fear based. And it's like if the opposite of love is fear, it's like, and God is love. Like it's like, well, what are we really teaching? How can we be teaching God if we're putting people in fear? Fear of like, if you do this, you're going to hell. If you don't do this, you're going to hell. If you're going to this, you're going to hell. It's like, well, where's this loving God? It's like, we're all sinners. It's like, I mean, again, it's just like, but now I see this from a different lens, a more of a spiritual lens of like, I mean, so many people claim to be religious and all high and mighty, but then you see the way they carry themselves and they see the way they act and the things they do, and it's all fear based. And that's the programs you talked about earlier. It's like deprogramming and reprogramming. It's like, again, it's like getting out of these fear based thinking programs into these love based thinking programs, and realizing it's like the energy you carry and tap into is again, call it great spirit, the supreme soul, God, intelligent conscious energy, whatever you want to call it. It's like that is the essence of our being, is love and peace. But when you start distracting ourselves, not being present, and we start engaging in these low vibrational frequencies of fear and resentment and anger, like fear being the big one. That's the system, right? The system has always thrived on fear. They always put people in the fear, because when people are in fear, they'll do anything. You get them to do anything. And the opposite of that is like when you're in that state of love, understand it, and you live it. You're sovereign, and then all of a sudden there's like this knowing. It's like, so someone could tell you, well, you got to go do that, and I'll be like, hell no, I got to do that, because it doesn't align. It's not right. It's not in alignment with what I feel, based on the energy that I'm vibrating in. So, I just kind of had a lot of these spiritual understandings as it pertains to religion growing up, of like, what is God? What is this? It's a nature, it's a vibration. It's like this frequency, this high vibrational frequency that we can be and tap into all the time. So I got to teach my kids. It's like, it's hard to teach them God, right? It's like, because it's like, again, there's Jesus, there's all these like spiritual leaders, like, all these deities, like who are they? What do they represent? But it's like, choose love. I was like, this is like our little family thing. It's like, choose love, choose love. Every minute of the day, every situation, you can either choose love or you can not choose love. You can choose fear or anger. You know what I mean? It's like these other emotions are normal. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be even depressed and anxious. But like, we don't want to be in those emotions chronically. But like, we also can like snap out of these and choose love. It's like, okay, no, I'm grateful. I got a shitload going on. I'm a creative person. You know what I mean? And all of a sudden your emotional body and the chemistry changes. And like, this is a choice. And it's like, it's not just reading a book about a disciple or, a deity of some sort, and then being saved or connected. Yeah, you can make sense of some of the teachings, but unless you carry that vibration and live that vibration, I'm not sure you're fully experiencing what you're reading about anyways, God or whatever term you want to put on it. But, at least that's from my perspective. I know everyone's got their interpretation of it, but it's interesting when you start seeing it in a different context, through a spiritual lens that you can make sense of. Like I have more appreciation for the Bible's teachings now than I did, back then. But I also study like Buddhism and Hinduism and shamanism and everything else as well. And they're really all kind of saying the same thing. Like, the kingdom of heaven is within. Like they're talking about co-creating with God, because we are a part of God. God is everywhere, right? I mean, this highly intelligent, conscious energy system that we're a part of. It's all intelligent. It's all alive, and we're a part of it. And we have, the luxury and the ability to live, live as long and as fruitfully as we possibly can, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting you say live, right? Because one of the big questions that a lot of people ask, like, why there's evil in the world, right? There's evil in the world, and how do you justify the evil? And when I've contemplated this quite a bit, and I forget where I heard this, But it's fascinating to look at the word evil, and you said the word live, and all evil is the word live spelled backwards. And so in order to actually know what life is and know what these higher vibrations are in an experience, a 3D reality that is requires polarity and duality for there to be existence, there needs to be something that is anti-life in relation so that we actually know what life is. Because otherwise, if we're all one, there's no experience. And so God created this separation where there's the evil is just anti-life. You know, it's lower, denser frequencies. And I find it fascinating with my parents. I've been reflecting on this recently, and I think the stages of awakening, right? We all go through it. As soon as you start having these deeper experiences, it's like, I want to tell the world about this. I definitely want to tell the people I love the most about this, because I don't want them to suffer anymore. I want them to wake up. And you become like this preacher, and then it creates more resistance, and you start realizing, okay, this isn't working, and then you have to do some more deeper healing. Like, why isn't this working? Like, I had the truth, and then you realize I'm just becoming just like them. Like, I'm projecting my own knowing onto somebody else. And it leads into understanding that the only way to really help share a message is through embodiment and the frequency that you carry. And it's not about what you say and what you do. It's about who you become and how you be. And, I find it fascinating when I look at my parents and they're so in fear of the devil or evil or just suffering, that the very belief structure that they have is they're trapped by the very thing that they're scared most of.
It's amazing, isn't it?
And it's so fascinating to think back on, when these belief structures were created a couple of thousand years ago and how they got so calcified and literally turned upside down to control people. Damn.
It's wild, man. I love that you brought up the evil and like the anti-life, because that is it. If people could just understand that, you're either choosing life or you're choosing death. You're either choosing God or you're choosing the devil, right? I mean, it's like it's not like, and it's a place that you're experiencing here on this planet, not somewhere where you go. Yeah, I mean, you believe in reincarnation, you come back, where you are, wherever you are, have evolved spiritually, you come back, and the next time around, or however that works. But, it's like some people live and die and they've never lived, right? I mean, it's like you've been in this chronic state of fear, and even if they've read the Bible and go to church, they've never experienced God. They've never lived. It's like, eating whole foods, like nutrient rich, nature. You're promoting life, and that's just what I really learned with the Rastafarians, is like how much they value life, everything, right? And even the shamans, Native Americans, like everything is alive, everything is conscious. The rocks, the trees, obviously the plants, the grass. I mean, it's like life, and then we have the choice to participate in that. And or not, and unfortunately, it just manifests itself in disease and decay. And then you start making the analogy or understanding mushrooms and their role in the environment, right? And mushrooms are highly fascinating when you start studying them. They are life and death. Like they do promote life. They're also part of regeneration. When things die, they're recycling the dead tree and the dead animal back into the soil. The mycelium's taking the nutrients and it's bringing it back into plants, trees, and other mushrooms and promoting life. And it's like this constant cycle of life and death. But nature knows that it needs to just be and live, right? It doesn't rush. It doesn't do its thing. But we just kind of screw up that. These humans, as conscious, aware beings, we just screw up that process of life, and have no respect for life. And you look at agriculture, right? It's like spraying. It's like anti-life. Everything is anti-life. And it's crazy. Like we're killing the microbiome in the soil. We're killing the microbiome in our guts. We're killing we're killing everything. And antibiotic. I understand its role, for emergencies, but it's killing. Anything anti-life is killing. And that's the system we live in. It's like death, 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 death. So we have to bob and weave, and we're we're just trying to survive. But the simple fundamentals that people have been talking about forever is when you stay close to nature and you connect with source, you're choosing life, and then you're choosing higher vibrational foods, and you're choosing higher vibrational water, no fluoride and all this, all this stuff that's, again, anti-life. It's not supporting life. It's not promoting life and well-being. So it's just a different way of looking at it. Like, you mentioned like, yeah, that's like the religion, the teachings have been flipped upside down. It's smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of
Yeah.
great stuff that's taught in the church, but there's a lot of confusion. I think that's the problem. People are confused. And if you're in fear, you're in low vibrational, as you mentioned, and you're not really connecting to what you're supposed to be believing in, which is God. You're
Mm,
actually living in a state, say, of evil. And that word
mm.
doesn't necessarily translate well, because you think of evil, you think of people doing evil things, but you're in that low vibrational. It's probably equivalent to evil, right? I mean, even though your heart can still be in better places, but
Well, what it
yeah,
really is just trauma. Is
it is.
trauma. It's collective trauma. It's psychological trauma. It hurt people. Hurt people is the
Hurt
saying,
people.
right? And so the evil in the world is from people that it's just the trauma that's continuing to be passed down, and that's why it's so important for us to be on this healing journey. And it is really exciting time to be alive, but it's also very daunting. And it's almost like the universe created this experience where it wouldn't be worth living if everything wasn't on the line and the stakes weren't so high. And so there's this tension of, as the intensity of this dense frequency that's consuming the planet, there's this great opportunity for awakening that's taken shape. And it's really cool to see the plants helping us in that as well. And yeah, I read this book. I don't know if you've read it. It's called Dispelling Wetiko or
No.
Wetiko. And the Wetiko is a term, I think it's a Native American term, that it's about this collective psychological virus. And when you look out into society and our culture, it's the very thing that you're speaking to. It's the way our political, financial, social, ecological, like all these systems, our health system too, like the very thing that is supposed to, like, we're taught growing up about, what's nutrition, what's healthy, what's, the religion, like all of the very things that are supposed to help us evolve are the things that are actually keeping us trapped. And
Totally.
it's this self-eating energy that we need to wake up out of. And it's a psychological virus that we're all in. And it's this programming. I went to the supermarket the other day, and I was just pushing my cart, and there's not that many organic. The organic section is really, really small. And I was walking by this guy, and his wife or his partner was grabbing some organic fruit or something. And he like ran up to her, and he's like, no, 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 like, don't get organic. We don't need organic. Like that's like just more money. Like he just didn't understand the greater reason for organic food. And I just
Mhm.
saw he was out of shape, overweight, unhealthy. And I'm not judging. I'm just speaking to the point that our society is so lost and programmed into the opposite. And they think, and they're told, and we're all told that this is health, this is the way to do it. And so it's the very thing that's it's keeping us trapped. It's really, really fascinating. And that's why it's really cool to see all these plant allies coming online in such a big way and becoming more mainstream with
Totally.
ayahuasca and mushrooms and psychedelics, and the reintroduction of cannabis and the connection to the spirit of it. So talk about the journey with the plants, and this great paradigm shift and awakening, the potential of really shifting things in a big way as we move through this collective paradigm shift, and your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think piggybacking off what you're saying there, I think it's critical, and it's almost like, of course, this would happen because this is how God operates, right? It's consciousness, right? It's like it's the yin and the yang. It's like it has to happen. We have to, while all this darkness and density, as you mentioned, happens. There has to be some sort of balance to that. So naturally, people are waking up. COVID is waking people up. It's also killing a lot of people, and then not the COVID virus, but all the indirect issues that are related to it. And people's mental health and the suicide rate, but it's also awakening a lot of people, and the plants, the allies. I mean, this is the conscious, intelligent energy system that we're part of. This is the great spirit. This is not happening as a coincidence that all of a sudden people are just like recognizing that these psychedelic plants have spiritual and emotional attributes that can help shift the course of mankind here in a critical time, in my opinion. Bring some awareness, some consciousness to what's happening. That we're killing ourselves. We're literally walking off a cliff. So I think it's absolutely necessary, and I'm and it's and it's no coincidence that there's such a surge of this right now, because there needs to be some sort of balance to what's going on. And this is how, to me, it's like the system's job has always been to separate man from God. It's a spiritual booby trapping in every which way you look, through the church, through food, through water, through medicine, through the chemtrails. I mean, through the micro, again, the anti or the pesticides and herbicides, all the stuff we're killing. It's like it's always been meant to put you in fear and destabilize your spirit, right? I mean, it's like you see it all over the place: the genocides and persecution of certain religious groups, the Native Americans, the Rastafarians. It's always happened. People that become too strong spiritually, you have to eliminate them. They have no other way to deal with them, because their power is too strong. So you separate man from God by booby trapping the very things that connect them to this intelligence, energy system, the supreme soul. This is what's happening, right? I mean, the mushrooms, they're growing everywhere on the planet, every continent. You can find, these highly intelligent mushrooms. Ayahuasca, more specific to South America, but different pockets. Like the understanding of these medicines is becoming more and more prevalent. Mainstream media is carrying these stories coming out left and right. However, I still see this being taught in a medical bucket. This is way beyond medical, right? This is where it excites me, is because the psychedelic space is challenging the paradigm, the old paradigm of the medical system, because it doesn't acknowledge the emotional and spiritual body. The spiritual body in Western industrialized colonialized culture doesn't exist. We're just a meat suit. Oh, and you just got a mental health issue. We don't talk about the emotional body. We don't talk about the spiritual disconnection we have to Mother Earth and people and tribe and all this other stuff. So what's happening is really challenging the medical system. It's like, guess what? There's way more here. I would still like to see more people in this space actually talk about the spiritual nature of this, because everyone's so cautious on how we talk about it, because we don't want FDA to say no because it's a spiritual tool, right? I mean, it's like, this is really challenging a lot of like the current paradigm, and hopefully people that are like, still supporting the old agenda and trying to bring this into the psychedelics, hopefully it will help them make sense of what this actually is. Because I still see a lot of people in the space are still hanging on to the old pharma model, and like, you know what I mean, and really want to like patent this and patent that and control this molecule and control that molecule. And take out the experience and put it into a pill. So, it's like all this stuff. It's like, no, we need to have this awakening through the experience. And this, we can't lose sight of what is actually happening. People come out, it's like, oh, it's such an esoteric and mystical experience. Well, what's happened? Like, well, I felt unconditional love. I felt connected to this energy I can't describe. I seen Jesus or Shiva or Buddha or whatever, deity that you want to, people experience.
Schedule one drug. We can't we can't be having them connect to a God.
No, we can't connect with God outside the church. Well, you can't do that. It's impossible, right? So it's just blowing the paradigms wide open here. And, people listening to this probably I sound crazy, but it's like,
well, it depends which paradigm they're listening from, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's an interesting time to be alive. Like you said, the allies, these plant allies, they've always been here to support us. They've been demonized forever, and for good reason, right? I mean, cannabis, look at cannabis prohibition. It's way beyond the medicine of cannabis, the spiritual nature, the medical nature. It's the industrial applications, right? Hemp replaces nylon. Hemp replaces like all these, these oil-based petrochemicals and all this other stuff that we create.
You can make hemp paper too, right? Instead of cutting down entire forests for trees, you can just, and isn't it like if you, I'm not sure where I heard this, maybe you can.
Phytoremediation?
Yeah, well, like planting hemp in non-organic fields that have been covered with pesticides actually over a couple of years will clean the soil out as well.
Yeah. Phytoremediation, yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. That's what they used in Chernobyl to help clean out the toxicity. It helps purify the soil and the land and all that stuff, right? So it's like this amazing, sustainable, viable plant that covers all the buckets: the food, the medicine, the shelter, the clothing, right? It's like, so we could be self-sufficient on hemp if we didn't outsource China or wherever, but like, well, no, we're not gonna do that. We're gonna create synthetic fibers out of oil that we're extracting from the Middle East and bringing it back over here, and all the crazy shit that goes into the booby trapping of staying connected to this beautiful planet and all the plants that this system has put on the planet for us to use. Now we're
Yeah.
just awakening to their power and their viability. Unfortunately, we had to go through just chaotic, archaic policies, and the Industrial Revolution was nothing more than poison progress. I'd like to think that this next phase, even though we're in this crazy world of technology now, like that, there's some respect towards the land and the bodies and the minds, but I'm not sure. Again, the systems that be, they don't want people too aware, right? Because if we're too aware, then it challenges the agenda. So, but
Yeah.
things are moving quickly. People are waking up. People are banging the drum. It's pretty interesting for sure.
Yeah. There's so much in this conversation. It's really interesting, like you said, with the policy and the governments and how archaic the systems are, and how there's no way for them to keep up with how fast the world is shifting with the advance of technology. And so we're just moving through a really crazy time in life where it's like, what is going to happen over the next 10 years? I mean, buckle up. It could be, World War III on one end to like, all of a sudden, like there's this collective awakening where it's like we put down our arms and we connect with our heart and we realize we are all one. We are all one with the earth. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And like you spoke about, I think even I've been reflecting on this too with the conversation around mental health, and it's really beautiful that we're quote unquote destigmatizing the conversation around mental health. People should be able to speak when they're struggling and having an issue. But I've just recently been contemplating on this, that mental health is not just mental health. I mean, we need to be talking about well-being, and you can't talk about the mind without talking about the emotional body, the spiritual body, and the physical body. So if you're having mental health issues, like, what are you eating? Are you eating high inflammatory foods? Are you out of shape? Are you moving your body? I mean, all of these really simple things that can really help you feel better in your body and in your mind. We're talking about the emotional body. Like, are you able to process your emotions? Do you understand when you get triggered and how your nervous system gets activated and what it's trying to communicate to you? And what's your connection to the greater self? Like, however you connect with that, it's that connection that there is something greater than the self, and we are connected to that. We are not separated. And so we're moving through this story of separation, like Charles Eisenstein talks about. We're moving from story of separation into a story of interbeing, and how that takes place. I just find it a really fascinating question. Like, what is the next 10 years really going to look like, and how do we help this collective healing that it needs to take place before we drive the ship off the cliff?
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, I believe there's going to be a lot of death and destruction before we get to a point of healing. That's just the way I see it and forecast it based on what I know and the way
What
I
does that
see
look
things.
like? What do you mean? Tell us more about that.
Well, to me, we're walking into a war, whether it's World War III or possibly a civil war. Who knows what the hell is going to go on? We're definitely we're already in a war, right? We're in a spiritual war. We always had been.
Mm-hmm.
The squeeze continues to get tighter and tighter. The squeeze continues to get stronger and stronger. So the whole, emancipate yourself from mental slavery is a starting point. So whatever you want to call it that, or if you want to call it, waking up, or, and becoming less ignorant, just waking up. But like, that needs to happen. That's happening. Unfortunately, there's so many people are subscribing to the old earth, like Dolores Cannon talks about the new earth, and several other, spiritual people are talking about this. It's happening. I think it's been happening for some time. Unfortunately, the world's going to have to shed some excess fat, if
Yeah.
you want to call it that, right? It's just the way it happens. I'm certainly not supporting war and genocide and all this stuff, but we're in the middle of it, right? We have been for some time. So I think there's a cleansing happening. I hate to say it, like it's like the world, the way it regenerates.
Well, so the longer these, like, people hold on tightly and they don't I mean, it's fear, right? This fear of the unknown, this fear of letting go, which is synonymous with the fear of death, which is the greatest fear of us all. Is like the great unknown. What happens when I die? I don't know, and it scares me so much that I'm just gonna hang on to who I am, what I believe, and try to create some type of connection to safety in knowing what's going to happen. And we're moving through this collective like expansion of everything to technology and then consciousness. And if you're hanging on and you can't learn to let go and surrender into the unknown, and in order to do that, you have to confront your death. Like you said earlier, like we're so scared of death that we just don't look at it. And what that creates is we never actually fully live. Because until you actually contemplate and confront the impermanence of life, life is cyclical. Death implies life. Without death, we wouldn't be living. And so this idea of we want to live forever, we want to hang on, even like we do so much to, if someone's on their deathbed and they're let's try and make them live for 2 more weeks connected to tubes, like because it's our job to save everything and make sure nobody dies. What if we honored death and we allowed and welcomed death in? Like a lot of these ancient cultures, death was a huge part. I think even in India, like some parts of India, death is honored. When someone dies, they do a ceremony and they pray and connect and help the spirit move on. And so it's this hanging on that is the issue. It's this psychological death process collectively that we're moving through. And I think, one of the things that I think is really beautiful is it's no longer, hey, we need to wake people up because it's happening, because things are changing so fast. It's how do we help people feel safe in the unknown and support them in being able to let go and loving them in that process. And in that process, there's an immense amount of grief. I mean, I know I've gone through my own personal experiences and plants have really helped support me in that process. But the depth of grief that I've felt on the other side of that has allowed me to feel a deeper connection to love and freedom because I've confronted that and I've welcomed it in, and it's allowed me to be more present and understanding and accepting the impermanence of life, which is all a really big part of it.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it amazing they've spiritually booby-trapped death too? It's like one of the most spiritual processes, much like birth. As you mentioned, cultures across the planet, the Rastafarians, right? Before people die, they have a wake. It's a party. It's a celebration. And in fact, some of them will use mushrooms or other, conscious forming plants and fungi to transition into the next phase, right? So there's this absolute relationship to death right from the start. Right from the start, you're born, you're taught about life and death. It's amazing in our culture. It's like we don't live. And then we fear death. And it's like, so there's fear along the whole path and you never really truly live. And then you're dying in a state of fear. It's just a crazy, crazy thing instead of state of love. If you actually believe in the soul transitioning, at least from studying Hinduism, Buddhism, it's like, it's kind of like the vibration you're in before you die is kind of how you are brought back into this planet. So if you're going out, in this really, really fear-based state and, all this stuff, like you better believe you're probably coming back in probably another fear-based state or a fear-based environment versus like going out in peace and love, which is our divine being. The soul transitions in that, in that vibration. And, I think, the Hindus and some Buddhists believe that if you've reached enlightenment, samadhi or whatever you want to call it, that the soul doesn't need to come be back to work out its karma because you've worked out your karma in this lifetime. But all the soul is trying to do is work out its karma, lifetime, and eventually coming to a purified soul, and then it can kind of live on. But it's such an amazing, interesting, perspective when you look at the way we've been conditioned to think is that we don't know how to live. Most people live and die, and they never live, and they don't even know how to die. They don't even die a spiritual death. So they've lived like this physical life, and there's been zero spiritual experience. It's just crazy to think how far we've gone, how much we've lost our roots and culture. Like, whether it's Native Americans or, you said the Indians, the Rastafarians, like we've all lost. It's like we've lost our culture everywhere. The system's job, even like the Rastafarians now have been destabilized. You know what I mean? They've constantly, Jamaica's a pretty poor country. Just find ways to booby trap. We don't want people too powerful. We don't want to be too sustainable, to grow too strong. because we become a threat. But it's wild to think that we're so spiritually bankrupt that we can't make sense of life or death. And
Mm,
we might like we're waiting till we die, so we're going to go to heaven. We missed the whole point, and we missed the whole experience of heaven if we had chosen that. So we live in a hell, expecting to go to heaven, when I'm not sure it works that way, But
mm,
who am
yeah.
I? I'm like
Just some guy. You're a
some
guy that's
guy.
doing doing a lot of big things in the world, man. And I know you're really passionate, and we're in deep alignment in bringing this message and helping facilitate experiences for people to really connect with these deeper aspects of themselves and safe places for people to feel. I mean, I think that's really what it is, like creating sacred space, creating safety for people to really confront and bring forth the emotions that are so unprocessed. And I think as athletes, that's one thing that's really, really lacking. When I first walked away from the NFL, I was somebody that had, my head on right. There's part of me that was really excited about like the freedom from the game. What's life like? And it was one of the most challenging experiences I've ever had to go through. And there's just not a ton of resources. The resources that the NFL is providing is, hey, we'll help you build a resume so you can get another job, because that's what purpose is. Purpose is your job, like what you're doing, and that will help you feel better. Or hey, we have access to therapists. Okay, the therapist, like I can talk about what I'm moving through, but this therapist doesn't there's no relatable experience. Like they don't understand what I'm going through. And there's what I found on my journey over the last 5 years working with plant medicines, understanding initiatory processes, ritual process, indigenous ancient cultures and ceremony, is what is really needed is so simple. It's a properly facilitated safe space for these guys, these athletes, to really feel and grieve the loss of everything they thought they were. And that's a
Mhm.
death process. The
Totally.
psychological, like the hanging on, like we were talking about, like physical death is just an aspect, but how can you actually die and let those stories die within you? And letting that go is what accesses the freedom. And there's just not a lot of spaces for that process to take place. And it's people just need to grieve and feel. And it's not just athletes, it's really everybody. Like you said, COVID was this collective initiation that we all went through. And we're being called to let go of old ways of being, not just individually, but collectively. And that requires a deep grieving process. And so how do we integrate and cultivate more spaces for people to just to feel what that feels like?
Yeah, it's a good question. I just think there need to cultivate more community leaders to be able to do more of this type of work, and I think it's happening. I think more and more. I mean, I see the work you're doing. There, again, as I travel the space, I'm running into more and more people that are doing similar stuff, and it's a challenge. It's a challenging thing because again, I work with a lot of veterans too, and as well as obviously athletes, specifically hockey players, and they're just like that old guard. It's like that really strong ego of protecting this false identity, right? We don't talk about our emotions, right? It's like it's never been a thing. At least when I wasn't playing, the guys didn't talk about their emotions. It was just like bury it, suppress it, bury it, suppress it. So yeah, it just requires a different way of thinking. It's basically the opposite of what we've been taught. It's almost the complete opposite, right? It's like, no, there's nothing wrong with crying, and there's nothing wrong with sharing your feelings with people, because that's how you really get help. That's how people can actually help you. Because if you don't bring it to the surface, everyone thinks everything's okay, or you do a good job. I did a great job at pretending everything was okay when things weren't okay. So
And that's where the
um,
drinking and the pills, and you wonder
yeah,
why
it just
that's such an
washed
issue
me
in the
down.
culture is just
Yeah,
we're numbing out from those feelings because we don't want them to bubble up because we have so much shame because we're told as a society that that's not being a man. Toughen up, don't cry. And it's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna drink myself silly then because I don't know how to process what I'm actually feeling.
exactly. And then you probably go home and you're going through some emotional stuff, and you land crying at home drunk, and you know what I mean. Like it comes out. It's no question it's going to come out. It's just a matter of when, right? But like if there was a healthier way to express that, You could get ahead of the game versus having to bury yourself and then find the depressive nature of these things, and have to work it through that way. But yeah, I think like the yoga communities and just kind of, you mentioned it earlier, like really tying in the whole package. It's just like it's all of it. It's the physical body, right? It's like as a society, we feel like we have to go to a gym and do CrossFit or whatever it is, like put this like real structured, rigid type of program around the physical body to be worthy or to be like, to be healthy, and like all these like weird stories we put ourselves in. It's like, as we get older, we realize like our bodies aren't as, in good shape as they were when you're younger, right? Just like a little bit more soreness, this and that. So it's like, it's helping guys, change the perspective on the physical body. Like I just want to wake up in the morning and feel good so I can have enough energy for my girls. You know what I mean? And like and be creative and do what I need to do. Like I'm not worried about being 220 pounds, 9% body fat and benching 340 pounds or whatever bullshit numbers I would put on all this stuff. Like I don't even go to the gym. Like I just like I've found ways to be able to maintain a physical body, that's healthy, that operates properly. I feel good. I can be functional. I have energy. All that good stuff. I guess it's where I was going with it is like, I think especially in the male culture, it's like you got these guys that have like these old school ways of like taking care of the physical body. It's just like looking good in a shirt, or what I mean, like looking like you're ripped, or but not understanding the physical body as like a vessel for more, right? For creativity or for intuition, for this spiritual access and all this other stuff. So it's like these slow teachings of like using the physical body as like a starting point, but kind of like what in my situation and experience with yoga was just like peeling back the onion. It was just like, oh, I'm starting to feel better. Oh, I'm starting to understand this a little more. I'm breathing. I'm connecting to spirit. Oh, I'm actually in some bit of a meditative state, or I'm trying to be. I'm catching my thoughts. All this stuff. Oh, and then I actually start studying like the layers of the 8 limbs of yoga and the moral and ethical values and the senses, all whatever, all this stuff. But these are all teachings. It doesn't have to be through yoga, but all these teachings that you can kind of build on these building blocks starting from the physical body. But I think we've lost sight of like why we're exercising in the first place. Is it just to lose weight or shed off, all the chicken wings and beer we drank this weekend, or is there something a little bit more spiritually, deeper that we can connect with why we would actually take care of our physical body? Is it about retaining energy and having energy for our creative faculties, so we can actually like be creative beings in this world and give our children attention that they deserve, right? It's like not being so tired because we did all of this unsustainable activity. So I think that at least the way I see it with these real alpha males that I deal with is it's just really softening them up, right? I mean, it's softening them up to the idea that it doesn't need to be so rigid. It doesn't need to be so hard. You know what I mean? We don't have to be so hard on ourselves. We don't have to crush our bodies all the time. Yeah, I'm not opposed to like working out hard and you know what I mean, and training for something. But like, I also believe like the effort and the ease, right? I mean, it's what yoga teaches: the power and the peace, the strength and the softness. Like, there has to be a balance there. So if we're just crushing ourselves and expecting to be, getting to that next dimension of mental wellness you're talking about, like. We got a lot of work to do. Opening up the heart, like just talking about that to some alpha dudes is like, oh, opening up the heart, quieting the mind. Oh, that's such a granola thing to say. However, it's such a absolute truth too, right? I mean, it's like, but it's hard to teach that rigid group of people this new, gentle, peaceful way of being, But the people, again, it's like the people that are ready for it, have suffered enough and had enough pain in their life, that are at this like precipice of life, like they're either going to accept it or not. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, this is like the road most people get to at some point. You either choose life or you choose death at some point. And I'm not sitting here suggesting like my philosophy and my way is the way. You find your way that works best for you based on like taking all these spiritual teachings and just finding your blended version of what that looks like and feels like. And that's the beauty of it. That's the creative nature of like how to feel well and how to create your own little culture. That's kind of like my whole Cote culture thing that, that my transformational coaching is like, I don't want you to follow what I do. I'll give you some like just like simple fundamental pointers based on what I've learned, but like figure this out on your own, create your own culture based on your upbringing, based on your experience and your sufferings and your pain, what makes in your relationship to body and mind and all this other stuff, and find what works best for you. Because what works for me, it doesn't necessarily work for you. Some people don't want to get up at 4:30 in the morning. I love getting up early in the morning, but some people don't. That's fine. Just find another version, another way of doing this. But I think I guess where I'm going with this all is just like helping guys understand it doesn't have to be so rigid. Create your own structure, but it's way, way beyond the body, way beyond even the emotional. It's again, I really truly believe like what we're facing is a spiritual crisis. We are so disconnected to the earth, people, and self, and that's to me, like a starting point. Like you said it earlier, it's like this mental health. I mean, I think the whole mental health movement has been sabotaged by people that don't even know what mental health is. Like, it's like the sick leading the sick or the blind leading the blind. It's like the same people that want to push mental health are the same people getting shit-faced and trying to push the mental health agenda.
When the doctor that's telling you how to be healthy is like the most unhealthy looking person on TV, you're like, what the fuck am I taking advice from this person for?
Yeah, so we've sabotaged the mental health movement, like reducing it to like the simple answer of like, oh, we just gotta like do one thing or just go to the doctor and get one pill. It's like, no. This is a very simple. It's a very simple concept, but it requires a shitload of discipline to tackle all these different, different parts of the spiritual nature that we are. So it requires, again, a lot of accountability, a lot of responsibility and discipline, which a lot of people aren't willing to do.
Yeah.
They want the safe, soft, easily accessible life that doesn't require any sort of like, structure.
It starts with responsibility, right? Self-responsibility. And I think that's the hardest thing for anyone, really. And once you take that responsibility, it's like what you talked about earlier, the Pandora's box opens. It's like, fuck, like now I got to start showing up if I want to feel good. And then it takes discipline and all of that. Man, we've covered a lot of ground today, Riley. I'm really, really grateful for you, brother. Really grateful for your story and for what you're doing in the world and how you're showing up. And just kind of circling back, if there's any athletes that, have gone through the transition, and transition, I feel is as an athlete, especially when you play as long as we did, is a constant process and always, integrating and always, finding deeper layers. But let's say someone's, whether they're just recently retired, at any level, or they're 10, 15 years into this thing and they're still struggling, what are some things that athletes can really, really do? Where should they start? How can they begin connecting with the deeper parts of themselves and their purpose? And, just any kind of final words of advice for the athlete that may be moving through their own transition.
Yeah, it's a pretty loaded question because there's a lot there. But I think it's defining a new purpose right out of the gate, right? Like up until that point, whether you're aware of it or not, your goal was your purpose, right? There wasn't, for most people, at least I'll speak for myself anyways, like athletes are very, very focused on their goal, and that's their purpose, right? They don't have like this luxurious purpose outside the sports world, right? That's bigger than themselves, that's actually trying to change, society and help people out, right? People have their charities and stuff like that, but it's pretty narrow. I think it's defining a purpose, and it's like, as soon as we possibly can, shedding the old self, like using that as a tool and a foundation to do your work in the community, and learn from it, bring pieces of it with you, the discipline and the work ethic and, a lot of valuable things that you learned through the sports world, but it's now applying those to a new purpose. And then on like a spiritual level, it's like, obviously purpose is spiritual, but like, we have to connect to real energy sources, real power sources, and kind of detach from the things that rob us of energy. So it's like, again, it's like reforming our relationship with food. I know in football, probably much like my role in hockey, a skill guy is probably a much different diet than I had, but like, especially, bigger guys that were on the line, all that stuff. It's like about eating calories, and all of a sudden, like you have to reform your relationship with self. It begins with self-care. Start taking care of yourself, having a purpose, and connecting to something larger than yourself. As in, starting with diet. I think if you start connecting to your food, that just translates into the next thing. You start you start connecting to your medicine, a little bit differently, right? It's like, oh, instead of like maybe questioning why I'm taking all these pills or drinking at night, why am I doing these behaviors? And we can make sense of that. Maybe we can reform our relationship with medicine and supplementation. But I think, purpose is, I think everything. You have to find that, because if you're just roaming around, um, I mean, you could have all the money in the world and you're roaming. It doesn't generally work out that well. You know what I mean? You bump in, you're bumping into things, you're getting into trouble. You're not really. So I think identifying that and then just connecting, to self, that self-care, self-love, and then just starting somewhere, some sort of physical practice of something gentler than you were doing. Like it's almost like you're trying to bring the balance into the present moment, right? Because we went from like hardcore to now, like, okay, now we're in the real world, and now we have to be like reasonable with where we're using our energy. So
Yeah.
connecting to self, nutrition, start there, medicine, what I mean? I think these are sacred plant medicines come in, really have a profound way of helping shed the old self and kind of making sense of your true nature, right? The peace and the love that's already there, and
Yeah.
going from there.
Appreciate that, brother. Yeah, it
Yeah.
can be a lot too. I mean, if you're listening to this, me and Riley have been shedding layers for a while, and it is a journey, and the journey continues. And like you said earlier, I say this all the time. I feel like we're just getting started, and so just not beating yourself up of trying to be somewhere in the future. It's about showing up right now and starting where you're at, and that starts with the simplest of things, like bringing more awareness to what you're feeling in your body, how you're moving your body, and really finding stillness within yourself. And I think what I would add is the importance of community.
Yeah.
As athletes, especially team sport athletes, the lack of that structure and support of the locker room thing that's been really profound for me is seeking out community. And there's a lot of power in that, and there's a lot of communities out there. I know that what you're doing, and you said you support athletes and individuals in some one-on-one stuff and some other stuff you're doing. So as we close, if you could share, where people can find you, how they can connect with you, and possibly work with you in some of the projects you're working on as well.
Yeah. So RileyCote.com is the website, and I created, a transformational coaching brand. It's really, a spiritual coaching brand called Cote Culture. And it's not, it has my name in it, but it's really not about anything that I represent besides helping people find themselves and find their own culture, right? It's kind of creating a culture. It's tapping into all the things we talked about here today. So different people, I work with different people for different reasons, but they're all somewhat interconnected. Some people are dealing with more substance abuse. Some people are dealing with concussions. Um, but I seem to always tie it all in together the same way, because it's way more than just one specific answer, right? All these things need to be integrated. So whether you're dealing with a physical trauma of the brain or an emotional trauma or spiritual trauma that you've dealt with, it's still a trauma, and you still have to work through these blockages. And so it lands up being kind of coming back to the same type of teachings, but a little bit of everything. Even like, we talked about cannabis, some people dealing with, like, say, cannabis dependency. You know what I mean? Where I'm a huge cannabis advocate, and it's taking me years to figure that out. But dealing with, again, teaching people how to use cannabis intentionally, and actually how to modify their dose. They're just using too much cannabis too often, right? So simple little adjustments in life. It's just kind of like being aware of like your daily behaviors and adjusting them. A lot of times it's letting go of old, toxic behaviors, letting go of things that aren't serving you any longer, and, creating space. When there's space, now there's opportunity for new learnings, new teachings, new dimensions. So, I know it's a little bit overwhelming there, but yeah, it's a lot of all this stuff, right? It's because there's no, this is all I do. I'm just a nutritionist. I'm gonna get you. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, I'll give you insights on all of it, and you figure this thing out. Piece it all together. But yeah, work with all walks of life, and with all kinds of different issues. But to me, it really tie in the emotional and spiritual body, absolutely, and then the culture, the purpose. I mean, it's like you have to generate some sort of culture. We've lost it. We've lost our cultures to create our own. You don't have to subscribe to someone else's. Just create your own. Find an instrument, be creative. It's like, because we've lost that too. We've forgotten that we're creative beings. And when you're creating, you're in the present moment. And that's, an easy way to get into the present moment, because a lot of people are in the future and the past. So, so there's a lot there, but that's kind of, so it's all in the transformational world that, touch on a little bit of
Beautiful.
everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Where can people find you? What's the best way to contact you? Is it the website is rileycote.com? Do you have any social handles or any best way to contact you?
Yeah, so email is Riley at rileycote.com. I'm on Instagram at rileycote32. I'm on Twitter, the same, Riley Cote 32. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but I think the best way to hit me up would be on just basic email, Riley at rileycote.com.
Amazing, man. Yeah, it's been really a pleasure connecting with you, man, and dropping in. I'm really grateful for you, really proud of you, what you're doing in the world. It's really cool to connect with other allies on this mission. So deeply appreciate you, brother.
Yeah, thanks. And likewise, it's a pleasure to finally get on here and talk with you. I know we've kind of been going back and forth for some time, so I see you and see what you're doing, and props to you for for lending your vessel as a mechanism for change, because you're certainly you're spearheading, and helping your community and your network there. So props to
Awesome.
you.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all of you that listen to this episode. If you enjoyed it, a great way to support is to leave a 5-star review, rate it, subscribe, follow, and if there's anything in this conversation that you think would benefit someone that I know we covered a lot of ground here, and there's a lot of valuable insights. Go ahead and share it with them. I really appreciate everybody, and appreciate you, Riley. Talk to you next time. Peace.
Thanks, brother.